cloud. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Giovanni Charlo. I am the e-learning coordinator at Gaia Education, and I give you a welcome to this Glocalizers webinar series. The webinar will be recorded. Pedro, I believe we can put it on the Facebook live sharing at the moment.
It's on Facebook, it's live.
Okay, great. So people will be watching live on Facebook, and those of you who are here in the room will be watching it with us, with the presence of Maddy Harland with us. This webinar is entitled How to Develop Successful Enterprises Using Permaculture Design. It's offered to build capacity in systems thinking and holistic design for sustainability. This is part of Gaia Education's mission in educating for sustainability. I would like to just mention a couple of housekeeping tips. One of them is that this webinar will be recorded and will be made available in our YouTube channels, Gaia Education YouTube channels, and it will also be broadcast live on Facebook for those of you who are watching on Facebook. The materials, the PDF of the presentation will also be available in our website. Please close any open programs that you don't need at this time, and this will give us better bandwidth and to not interfere with the webinar. Your microphone and video will be turned off during the webinar, but you can communicate with your host and webinar participants via the chat box. At the end of Maddy's presentation, we'll ask you to post question and answers. Post your questions for Maddy to answer, but please use only the question and answer box, which is in your Zoom application. So instead of using the chat for the questions, please use the Q&A box for that. I also want to point out other resources that Gaia Education makes available on our website, such as various publications. We have the 4 key publications, which were published in collaboration with Maddy's organization. We also have Eco-Villages Around the World, a new book that was released this year. And the 4 keys is translated into Spanish and Portuguese as well. So if you speak those languages, you may want to look at those publications. There is a 10% discount on all our products for those who are watching this webinar, and towards the end of the webinar, you will get a code for that 10% discount. I want to also announce the release of the community implementation flashcards. These are directed specifically to the SDGs, the 17 SDGs that the UN put out in 2015, and Gaia Education also uses this in our training. And along with that, we published a handbook for engaging your communities in conversations about how to implement the SDGs. So please look for those products in our website, in our web pages. There is a shop link where you can see them. Additionally, we offer online courses for design for sustainability. This is a full 10-month course. It's also divided into pieces, so you can take just one dimension or the full certificate course. They are offered in English, Portuguese, and Spanish, and you can see there that information. The next course is going to be the economic design, which starts on the 18th of March in English and the 25th of March in Spanish. If you're interested, you can sign up for that course coming up this month, next month actually. And you can follow us on our several social media channels. As you can see in Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Medium, and other channels that we post constantly in, and you can share content in those channels. Also, please remember to subscribe for our newsletter, and that way you can get information on upcoming courses and other programs that Gaia Education is initiating. Additionally, for those who follow our whole learning journey, we have a certified trainers program, which involves taking a TOT, training of trainers, a face-to-face EDE, and one specialty online. Once you have completed those 3 steps, you can be interviewed to be a certified Gaia Education trainer and join our growing roster of trainers who are teaching Gaia education materials around the world. Today, then, we have my good friend, Maddy Harland. Maddy is editor and co-founder of Permaculture magazine and Permanent Publications, a publishing company dedicated to highlighting regenerative ecological solutions to design for sustainability. She helped set up the Sustainability Center in Hampshire, once a military base, now a thriving learning center. Maddy also is co-editor of the worldview key of the Gaia Education 4D curriculum, and she is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a visiting knowledge and exchange fellow at the Institute of Theological Partnerships in Winchester University. I hope I got all that right. It is really my great pleasure to welcome you, Maddy, to this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you. So, brilliant. Right, now I have a screen, and Gio, I would love to see my share screen view.
Okay, all you have to do is share it.
I'm getting there. Okay, are we going? Are we good?
Yes, I can see that now.
Brilliant. Okay, so that helps me start. So I want to really come down to basics and just remind everyone who's listening about some of the permaculture principles that are the foundational work of permaculture design. And of course, I probably should preface this with saying that in anything that we choose to design business-wise, we need to, first of all, obviously really live our ethics of care of the earth, care of people, and fair shares, limits to growth. So an acknowledgement of those fundamental ethical principles in any enterprise that we're designing. Now, the principles here that I'm showing you are a kind of mixture of Mollison principles and David Holmgren principles, because I've found over the years that whilst I very much appreciate David's principles, I also want to remind people of the value of the Mollisonian principles, which are very, very self-explanatory and easy to grasp, whereas David's can be sometimes a little bit more requiring protracted thought. I'll put it like that. So when we're designing sustainable enterprises, we want to look at how we create and nurture beneficial relationships. I mean, that's pretty common sense, but our relationships in our businesses, in our charities, in the organizations that we develop, if we nurture those relationships that are existing or the real low-hanging fruit, and we can keep that sense of nurturing foremost, that can make for very, very powerful enterprise design. The other thing we want to think about is creating multifunctional elements, and I will talk about that. But basically it means that when you're designing an enterprise, you want to, any really important element that you put a lot of energy into needs to have many functions. It can't just be sort of like a monocrop, a monocultural design that only has one yield from it. Obviously, a key principle of permaculture design is observation. When we look at land, we talk about the idea that we could observe a landscape for possibly a whole year before actually beginning to make an impact physically on that land. And in the same way, we want to have that dimension, not of necessarily of non-action, but of design and planning and observation and research, good market research in any organisation that we design. We want to design for diversity, and we want to look at diversity on many levels. Obviously, when we're designing land-based permaculture systems, we're really interested in biodiversity. In human organisations, obviously it's an inclusive diversity of people that brings strength to an organisation, but it can also be about diversity of yields and diversity of supplies. And obviously, it's when you design a resilient organisation, you want to integrate many elements. You don't want parts of your organisation that are out on a limb and are not nurtured and fed and included in the whole. And you may think, wow, this is all quite abstract at the moment, but I'm going to give you 3 case studies. Obviously, we've got to think carefully about our yields. What do we want to yield? And that can be very much about economic yield. Whether we're not-for-profits or commercial enterprises, we all have to have healthy yields in order to survive. And then we've got other principles like relative location, which is really important. The ideas behind stacking functions is fundamental. We are generally looking at fairly small and intensive systems. We're looking at how we can maximize our edge all the time to reach our markets, get our products out there. We're looking at feedback loops, so very much looking and taking feedback and learning from it. And I'll talk to you about how we do that in a minute. And looking at patterns, so designing from big patterns into details rather than taking a collection of details and then trying to design out an organisation. And obviously, really obvious aspect here is catch and store energy. So we're not interested in losing energy from a system. We want to cycle energy through a system as much as we can. And that can be about human efforts, it can be about heating systems, it can be about how many times you use or create an audience for a product. So take, for instance, this webinar. So it's live on Facebook, it's live on Zoom, but we're recording it and it'll go on YouTube. It'll become part of a program, but also I will take it and I will disseminate it through my systems and my media channels. And we can do that with a lot of other partners and networks in the system, so that it's not just a one-off event. It can be something that is a stored energy and resource that can be pretty much infinitely recycled. We're also looking at change and our capacity to respond creatively to change. And that has been a real fundamental principle that we in the publishing business have been working with for probably at least the last 2 decades, where publishing has been utterly revolutionized by licensing and technology. I'll come back to that in a minute. And I mentioned self-regulation and applying feedback. So yeah, we have to be robust enough to take criticism and regulate ourselves and develop ourselves. We'll never get to a point within an enterprise where we've reached a plateau where we've done everything right and we're coasting. There's always a need to be open to change and critical feedback. So those are the principles. I just want to say something briefly about the linear economy that we know from really from history. particularly in the last few hundred years. The linear economy is like a very greedy digestive system. It eats up non-renewable resources and converts them into yields or products, but it uses vast amounts of wastes that in the manufacturing and mining process that are then belched out into the atmosphere in the form of greenhouse gases. So that's the linear economy. And really what we're trying to reframe into is the circular economy. So we are taking resources, we're creating and making products that are consumed, but instead of just throwing away the byproducts and the waste, we're looking to keep them in the system, to enrich them, to return them into a cycle. So one of the best examples of this is the regenerative farm, or the regenerative eco-village indeed, that uses regenerative farming. So whilst farming, carbon dioxide is being locked up in the soil, and there is a maintenance of fertility. If it's in a grazing system, the pasture locks up the CO2 and then the animals create yields. If it's in a horticultural system, we're constantly cycling composts into fertility and then growing food out of that fertility and then cycling back those nutrients. So it's a closed loop system. And we need to apply this kind of thinking from farming into enterprise, because regenerative farming is looking at those natural ethics and principles and then adapting them to create food and other yields. So my first case study that I just want to take you on a journey with is Prickly Nut Wood. This is like a forest farm in the south of England. It is run by Ben Law, and he has over 100 acres, so about 47 hectares in rural Sussex in the south of England. Ben himself is famous for building a house that was on Grand Designs. It was Grand Designs' most viewed program for years, and the house is, you can see the house here, the early prototype in what is my top left-hand picture. It was built by Ben from coppice chestnut, larch, which is often a timber that's not appreciated, has oak flooring, straw bale wards, it has lime and clay plasters, it has cladding, which is called Waney edge cladding. It was a prototype of a roundwood timber frame building. So the idea of roundwood timber framing is the least amount of milling. It was built in 7 months, entirely by volunteers with Ben. There was absolutely no waste whatsoever from this build. There was no dumpster required, and the cost was £20,000. So about $30,000 for absolutely everything, all the heating system, the glazing, and all of the reed bed system and the water system. So a really, really low cost house, and built by people who in the main, that they'd certainly never built anything like this before, who had minimum carpentry skills. Another aspect, so then Ben then went on to develop his techniques. On the top right of the photograph is the Woodland Classroom, which is at the Sustainability Centre, and this is an outdoor classroom that again was built by volunteers from local materials from the wood. But Ben does a lot more than just build buildings from his wood. It's not just a timber farm. He has a mixed diversity of yields, and an important aspect of his farm is yielding food, which he does in clearing, and he keeps bees. And the butterfly there is just to remind me on those beautiful plums that the farm is also what we call a triple SI in the UK. So it's a site of special scientific interest. And that is because it has all sorts of very rare species in the southeast of England, like nightingales and silver-washed fritillaries, which are very beautiful butterflies. And this is achieved by, and also lichens, and this is achieved by really sensitive management of that landscape. And although he's coppicing and he's cutting on rotation chestnut coppice, he's also looking at how he can create habitat and wildlife corridors to keep the butterfly populations, the special lichens, etc., in good heart, to keep this triple SI status. And the last yield from the woodland at the real bottom of the pile of products is charcoal, because it's so labour intensive and it doesn't sell for very much. So although it's completely sustainable charcoal, it's the least of his interests. So this is a picture of Ben sitting in his outdoor kitchen some years ago, and it kind of gives you an impression. He's got coppice wood there, he's got crafts, the chairs are made from bent hazel, he's got different food crops, berries in the picture, he's making his own wines and preserves, he's got a little bit of game, some rabbit and pheasant hanging there. And, you know, he's herbs on the bench in front of him. And really he's demonstrating that many of his needs come out of this ecosystem that is actually a forest farm. But of course, there's more to it than this. So this was the work of an MSc student some years ago who really wanted to analyse Ben's livelihood in the woods. And so you see in the top left-hand corner that food is very diverse, very important. Ben does things like he inoculates timbers and grows all sorts of different mushrooms, particularly shiitake mushrooms, which he then harvests and sells at a premium rate to local restaurants. But he has all sorts of value-added products with crafts and trellises and garden arches. He's gone on to create building, he does training programs, and what has been really important is that for nearly 2 decades now, Ben has run an apprenticeship scheme. So he's had that dimension of people care and fair shares, and he has passed on his expertise and experience to the next generation and beyond. And he's trained at least 3 apprentices a year for nearly 2 decades, plus all the people who've come to his trainings and courses. So you see here that you've got a huge diversity of yields. So if the fungi project fails in 1 year, or the market for his garden arches and trellises doesn't go so well, he's got many other things that he can depend on. And indeed, he's been so successful at developing this mixed, stacked enterprise with many different yields, true diversity, great resilience, and based on improving his landscape in a circular economy way, not just taking away from it, that he's now come to a point where he was running a business called Ramwood Timber Framing Company, and that he's now delegated and passed on to 3 of his apprentices. And he still has an advisory role, but as he gets older, he's not out there timber framing and building structures every summer himself. He's focusing on other aspects of his business. And the latest one is developing very fine champagne cider. So again, adding value to a basic apple product and creating a really artisanal specialist product, which will be very sought after in years to come. So that's just, moving on. Ben Law, I just want to leave you with a lovely thought. So in permaculture and ecological design, we talk about succession, and we talk about beginning with weeds and then moving to the pioneer stage, and then finally moving to that climax stage where you get the old slow growing species. In my ecology, it's the yew trees and the oak trees. In the rainforest, it might be the mahogany, but it's those climax yields that take many years of an ecosystem to develop. So I've been working with and known Ben since the early 90s, and here we have his climax yield. So he's actually had time to build a beautiful natural swimming pool from basically timber. It's all made without concrete, from timbers. He has a bar there, so you can shoot some mojitos if he wants to on a warm day. And he shares this pool with his trainees and apprentices and friends, and it's in the woodland, and of course it's a wildlife habitat. We don't have huge amounts of poisonous snakes in the UK. We only have adders, so a pool like this would be fine. When I show something like this to Australians, they look at me with total horror, as it would be a snake trap. But here in the UK, it's just an absolutely lovely ecosystem that is like an add-on to Ben's business. But moving along, I just wanted to talk to you. So that's a private enterprise. The Sustainability Centre that I've been involved with since 1995 is a not-for-profit. It's actually used to be, until the Cold War, a recycled naval base. It's now a social enterprise, a charity, and an educational centre. And it's basically, we designed it very much with permaculture design principles. So we didn't want to be, we've seen too many educational centres relying on exterior funders to keep the core business alive. So we wanted to design in a variety of different enterprises, this whole stacking of functions and multifunctional elements. So we could generate our own revenue. So there is no operational funding. All of our core activities are met by the enterprises that create our own core funding and revenue. We do get grants and donations, and we invest these in capital projects on the land. So, any big builds, I'll show you one in a minute, they need to come from external sources. We can't make enough money out of our core work to build big buildings, but everything else is met by our own enterprises. The centre employs 23 core staff, plus lots of other partners and freelancers, and that's almost 15 people full-time. There are 4 other businesses who are located on the site, and in addition to that, there are 3 social enterprises as well. And the site itself has come a long way since the late 90s, but it still has work to do. It still has an element of the brutality of military architecture that we need to fix long term. So capital projects needed to complete, but basically the project itself, the charity itself, is stable and financially viable. So to give you an idea of the sort of diversity of products, and projects that we're running there. We have a youth program. We have about 3,000 children that visit us every year. Some of them we keep, and they stay with us for a 5-day period, and they do something called the South Downs experience. They come and live on site. They use our solar heated water. They use our photovoltaic system. They learn about all aspects of ecological design. It's kind of like the 4 keys to sustainable development for kids. We also run adult courses, and they're everything from really practical countryside skills and foraging skills and how to prune fruit trees, up to Ben teaching woodland management there. We also run things like permaculture design courses, of course, and we've had Luby McNamara and Starhawk and others teaching social permaculture and cultural emergence on the site as well. We have accredited and professional courses, so we train forest school teachers. We have opportunities for families to come and do learning together, for schools to come in for very specific activities. We have residential visits from all sorts of different clients. We run a campsite as well as a 38-bed hostel. We have a volunteering program, and we have activities, informal activities for families, like a little preschool group that come every week, and other programs. So much education going on the site, as well as social enterprises and businesses. One of the main income drivers for the site is our South Downs natural burial site. So we bury people there, and it's a very, we have 3 threads to it that are incredibly important, that Gaia Education would resonate with deeply. We have the social thread, so this has to be affordable, extremely personal. This is not like a commercial product where we pack in as many funerals as possible. We give people a lot of space. We ask people to design their own ceremonies and to feel an ownership. So indeed, we're involving that concept of worldview and being very inclusive about people's belief systems, so that people can have any type of celebration or funeral that they choose. We have very strict environmental criteria, so we don't even dig into the chalk with machines. All our graves are hand dug. We only use biodegradable materials for our coffins. There are no headstones from imported stone, and we're replanting with native trees. So we're creating a really beautiful English broadleaf woodland in something that was a really awful neglected plantation that hadn't really been looked at since before the Second World War. And finally, it's really important that the economics of this social enterprise work well, and that people know that they're contributing not only to a good end of life event for their relatives or loved ones, but they're also contributing by coming to the centre. They're contributing to the well-being and the ongoing development of the whole community that is the Sustainability Centre itself. And so all profits are reinvested in the entire site. So I mentioned the accommodation. I'm going to just move on quite quickly from this, but you know, we're still work in progress. You see on the right hand side of your screen that you have an ex-military accommodation block there. There's 2/3 behind that building that is still derelict, and it looks as though we're going to be able to do it up and radically extend our accommodation, which would be particularly useful in winter this year indeed. And we're also working on a £1.7 million project to totally eco-renovate and expand our main HQ building. And this is like a artist's impression of what it will look like, very much designed to fit into what is a woodland site. At the moment, I haven't got a before picture, but it's very brutal, bomb-proof 1960s military architecture. So this will be a really radical aesthetic and ecological departure for us, because it's pretty cold, that building, in winter. So the Sustainability Centre is a whole organism. It cycles its social capital back into the charity, the not-for-profit. It enables other businesses to exist and thrive on the site, like our organic cafe, like our horticultural therapy project, like my publishing company. We have all sorts of social interaction through volunteering, and volunteering isn't just about coming and planting trees, but it's about all the trustees and the people involved in the holding of the project are volunteers, and it's a really vibrant place. It's a place in conservative southeast England where people can come and experience a sense of belonging, and a sense of connection to shared values like caring for the planet and caring for people. And it's a green flagship, basically, and people live on site as well. It's not just somewhere to commute to. It actually provides some homes for some of the staff who live there. It's really hard for us to get planning in southeast England at the moment for permanent residential accommodation. So that's an edge that we're very gently developing over the years. And of course we have, I've talked about the education programme. So there are many, many different elements to the Sustainability Centre. It's not just a burial ground, it's not just an educational site, it's not just a place where businesses are run, it's not just a place where events happen every year that thousands of people attend. It's not just somewhere you can go and camp or stay and have a holiday. And it's not just somewhere you can volunteer. It's all of those things and more. So it's designed to have multiple elements that web together as an ecosystem that cycles energy through. And I talked about beneficial relationships. Well, that has been one of the fundamentals of this site design, that, our cafe feeds our education events, it caters for other events, it looks after our volunteers, it takes care of the people who come and stay with us on their holidays, and it's one of our tenants or partners in the organisation that pays rent and feeds money into the charitable body that oversees and holds together the design of these many elements and makes sure that everything's running well. So it's very much an interconnected enterprise. So like Ben Law has multiple products and the involvement of people and education, and this wonderful ecosystem that is a woodland farm, the sustainability similarly has all the beneficial relationships designed into the product, the site, with, you know, multifunctional elements and a diversity of yields, which creates a diversity of incomes. And that is a holy grail, that we're looking for these stacked enterprises and multifunctional design in our enterprises, so that we've got poly incomes and many different yields. So I'm just going to come to the end now and talk very briefly, looking at the time, about Permanent Publications. So Permanent Publications is our publishing company that we founded in 1990. And as you can see from this slide, its mission has always been to encourage people to live healthy, self-reliant and regenerative ways of life. And to date, we've published over 100 books in this time, many of them classics about permaculture, like Sepp Holzer's Permaculture book, and Patrick Whitefield's Earth Care Design, and Gio mentioned the 4 keys to sustainability, you know, the Gaia Education 4 keys. But there have been many, many more over the years, and indeed more coming. They're amazing. They breed these books. I just want to give you a real basis for our ethos and just quote Satish Kumar to you. He said some time ago, and this really touched me: business without without spirit, trade without compassion, industry without ecology, finance without fairness. Economics without equity can only bring the breakdown of society and the destruction of the natural world. Only when spirit and business work together can humanity find coherent purpose. And I think we're seeing this. We're seeing this horribly clearly with climate change and the 6th mass extinction, that we don't put spiritual or ethical values into business generally. We don't trade with compassion. We don't have fair trade, let alone fair shares. We don't see our enterprises and our industries in terms of ecologies that are also fair. And we don't share. We don't have equity. And so we are experiencing breakdown. And it will only become more and more apparent as the polar ice caps melt and our sea levels rise, that breakdown and climate chaos and those freak weather events are going to become more and more evident. And that's going to have an enormous financial effect on business as usual. So in 10 years, 20 years' time, everything I'm saying will be even more evident and common sense than it is now. And honestly, using permaculture design to design in these ethics and these principles, I believe will be utterly common sense and mainstream in a few years' time. It amazes me that not, more large-scale corporates aren't really integrating this stuff yet, but I do know some that have started already. So we work really hard. This is a slide. I'm not going to describe everything because I'm going to wind up soon and open for questions, but I wanted to give you an idea that, the 3 ethics of earth care, people care, and fair shares are very much at the core of the design of the business. And these are really useful ethics to start first-based design from. And you can ask yourself, okay, how I run my office earth care? How do I operate as an enterprise? How is that really taking care of the earth? Am I nurturing resources, natural resources, or am I just using them unconsciously? How do I integrate people care into what I do. How do I look after the people I work with, not, you know, my customers, but also my colleagues, my staff? You know, am I non-hierarchical, people-centered? And do I have clarity about roles? Or is it all a bit command and control, or a little bit hippie flaky? Because we really have to get that stuff very well organised. And, you know, fair shares, again, it's been called corporate social responsibility, and another way of talking about it. But talking about how we work, particularly with our partners, and develop equitable contracts and partnerships and relationships of respect and profit sharing and ethical procurement and so forth. So being really focused on that side, and also having a dimension of the gift economy as part of the core aspect of how the business runs, so that you're not just developing products to sell people, you're also developing access to products and information for people without access to Western currency. I think that's incredibly important. And I'll tell you how we do that in a minute. So that's kind of, and there are many, many ways that we do this, that it is on the slide, but time is short, so I'm going to move on. I just wanted to talk a little bit about stacking enterprises, because for me, this is really, really key to this kind of work. So Joel Salatin, the regenerative farmer in the US, he talks about stacking fiefdoms, and here's a picture of the good old medieval castle and a fiefdom with the serfs in the field toiling, probably while the lords and ladies are in the castle doing something far more relaxing. So I really prefer not to talk about fiefdoms, and to talk about much less hierarchical approach. And that's why I want to reframe this stacking concept in a metabolic way. So we are all, whether we are a founder of a company or the youngest colleague coming into the system, we're all working within an interconnected system where there are multiple enterprises supporting each other, creating multiple yields. And this is how my company works. So important elements vital for the survival, like cash flow of a company, are underpinned by a mosaic of enterprises that perform different functions but support each other. No one enterprise or function is more important than the other, because they all perform differently. So no one marketing plan is the most important. It's part of a collection of elements that uphold the health of the system. The products are also designed to be interrelational. So we produce a magazine, we produce books, we produce YouTubes, but in the same way, the sustainability runs training courses, they have accommodation, they run a burial system. Basically, everything that they do is within the community, and each different element supports another element, so that the whole place has got this feeling of sort of whole life. So you go there before kindergarten and you can hang out there and hopefully volunteer until you end your days. And we have had, you know, events where we have had people deeply involved in that project who have actually been buried there eventually. So we're talking really about thinking of things as nodes within a system, rather than having this, you know, castle and the fields view. And this is, you know, business was also always very hierarchical, but really new modern business is getting away from that. So we're looking at business in terms of patterns and cycles rather than linear systems. All the nodes matter, and particularly the people. Your business really is only as good as the people who are working in it, whether you're a not-for-profit or a commercial enterprise. And I just say one more thing, that one of the really important aspects of any enterprise that we design, we have to design our financial reporting system. So we have to have really good accounting systems, and we have to really be able to understand from our systems what makes money, what is energy efficient, and what is productive. So when you look at these great entrepreneurs like Joel Salatin, for example, he, you know, when he designed his chicken business, he literally knew exactly where he needed to place the water in his chicken system so that the chickens had the easiest access to it. And in a way that principle of relative location is really relevant in any organizations that we run. And when we're running enterprises which are financially based, we really have to have a very good grasp of financial management. So, you know, back in the midst of time when I started, I really hated accounts, and I'd put it off until I absolutely had to file them at the end of my financial year. The software today is so good with online cloud-based accounting systems. My company uses QuickBooks, but there are many other systems which suit different levels of organization. You know, particularly for sole trader, there are simpler accounting programs, but we really have to set up our reporting and our financial recording as part of that system. It's no good being fabulously creative, writing brilliant marketing, designing fantastic courses, whatever you do on the creative end. We have to also have really good, sound financial reporting. So here's what we do. We have a strong online presence. We have very strong social media, as Gaia Education does as well. We produce a magazine that is not only in print, but it's digital. We capture and harness our energy by having all the 99 issues of the magazine to date available to all of our subscribers. All the back issues are available free, so we're not producing a piece of work and then it becoming obsolete. It stays as part of the strong archive of what we do. We use partners who are better at logistics and distribution than we have, because they have economies of scale. So we do what we're good at, which is producing the media. We don't try and do the jobs that we're not good at. We design in a gift economy, and we work really hard to maintain the many edges with many different audiences around the world. So that's kind of, you know, how the business is multifunctional and it stacks its enterprise. So why do we do all this? Well, for us, energy follows thought. So what we think is what we manifest. You know, we create the world that we live in, and we felt like we'd found something that was deeply transformative and positive, permaculture design, and that it was really important to take it as far as we could into the world and share it with as many people as possible, and really present tried and tested solutions so that we could change the way people think and thereby try and change the world. So very ambitious, but that was really the basis of where we were coming from. And to a certain extent, we probably have reached probably more than hundreds of thousands of people over the years. We feel very strongly that old media is corrupt, that it's hierarchical, that it shuts people out. We know that our big newspapers in all the countries of the world are very vulnerable to corporate lobbyists, that, you know, we look at Brexit, which was totally about advertising a corrupt agenda and misinformation through corrupt media. So we felt that it was really important to create new transformational, multi-platform media that's more resilient and beyond corporate lobbying. We want to really appreciate that though we might be people from many nations, we are indeed beyond national boundaries, because we share this beautiful vision of a transformed world. And we believe that our job is to present stories and narratives about that vision in all its multifaceted glory, and tell those stories in as many ways as we can find and engage with, and work with as many people and partners as we can to do that. So I hope that I've brought some of these principles to life for you in those three cases. Of course, we could talk for a week and break this down into real detail. So this is very much a taster, but I hope that you feel that we've got somewhere. And I'll just leave this slide up and invite Gio to come back. But just leave this here for a minute, just to say there's a whole raft of free ebooks that people can download. And we run a website without a paywall. And we also have lots of films on permaculture media, which talk about many different solutions and aspects to the work that we do. So, and we do give away subscriptions and books to projects which don't have access to funds, particularly in countries that don't have easy access to Western currency. So that's our gift, Ecology. And yeah, please stay in touch with us. And if you want to write for us, or send us your news or your ecological solutions or anything like that, we would really love to hear from you. And yeah, please follow us on Facebook, where we're posting every day, and on Twitter and Instagram as well, where we share lots of our information and links to inspiring and useful stuff. So thanks very much for listening to me. And I'll stop now and open for questions.
Thank you so much, Maddy. This is really wonderful. A great presentation on the approach to a regenerative enterprising through permacultural principles and ethics. I really enjoyed it very much, and it also confirmed many of the things that I already believe in, and it's great to see examples of where they're being applied. So, and well, of course, let me also mention that Permanent Publications has been one of the most important partner to Gaia Education. We really, we thrive and learn very much from the experience of our partnership. So thank you so much for that.
I want to add my gratitude to Hilda Jackson, one of our early benefactors and founders, who was so instrumental in recognizing our work had value and encouraging us, and to Ross as well. But just to bring Hilda into this conversation, because she really was a huge support to us emotionally, as much as anything else, and got me involved in Gaia Education at an early stage. Thank you. just wanted to say that.
Thank you for that recognition for Hilda. And yes, she was a driving force and made all this possible for all of us.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. Anyway, so let me invite people now. We have a few minutes left, and I would like people to post their questions, if they have any, on the question and answer box. Not to use the chat box for this, because it'll be a little more difficult for us to track that. But if you have any questions, just post them in the question and answer box, and then Maddy can take those from there. To me, it was really fascinating to see those examples. I do have one question, Maddy, which is the structure that you created the Sustainability Center under. Is it a charitable organization? Are all the different pieces managed under one administrative protocol? How does that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's obviously a big project with many, many different partners and enterprises, but fundamentally it is run by one charitable trust who have volunteer board of trustees. Who, we have a thing with English charitable law that we have to have trustees that can't be employed staff. So we're a bunch of volunteers who are responsible for the financial and legal compliance of the organisation. But I was chair for 6 years until recently, and I very much wanted to bring in not just the trustees as part of the steering of the organisation, but also any staff that wanted to come to meetings and, you know, be part of the basis of sharing the direction of the project. So yeah, one not-for-profit, and then a trading arm, and then lots and lots of different enterprises. So the burial site is a social enterprise that is owned by the charity. And that means that we can trade and run a business and then funnel the profits of that business into the charity and still remain a charity.
Wonderful. What a good model and a great example of how to make it work. Yeah. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box. There are many thanks in the chat box. People are very grateful, and that is wonderful. I do want to check with you, will the PowerPoint, or in this case a PDF presentation, be available? Can we make it available on our website?
Yeah, I'll make sure it's available.
Great. So we'll post it along with the recording of the webinar.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Ellie wants to know, can anyone from any country use the burial services?
Wow, that's a question. Because it is what it is. I mean, theoretically, yes. I mean, it was developed as something that would serve our local area. People do come from further afield. To date, I don't think we've actually flown a customer in, so to speak. So that would be a first, because the whole point is that we want to set up enterprises like that all over the place. In many, you know, there are already many in the UK now that operate like that. And I hope that it's a movement that goes further.
Wonderful.
But theoretically, although it wouldn't be terribly ecological, it would be better to find somewhere like that nearer to home.
I know more and more people are using the natural burial systems.
Yeah.
All over the world, in fact.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by the social and spiritual diversity of the service offered, because it literally goes from the most minimalist atheist burial to, we've had you know, Egyptian mystery, we've had Celtic burials, we've had High Church of England, formal burials. We've even had, we were really delighted to be able to facilitate a Muslim burial with the Imam from Portsmouth as well, which was really good that we were allowed to do that. So the whole burial site's very deeply about diversity. It's about restoring biodiversity to the landscape, and also about this sense of inclusion and allowing people to hold very different beliefs and facilitating an event which is, you know, deeply personal and sometimes very traumatic. It is a traumatic event for many people, and holding that as a service for people within the community. I have deep respect for the people who run the burial side of the business.
Certainly. Okay, now a couple more questions have come in. One from Luke, who says, is it possible to have support for enterprise using permaculture design? Luke is from the Democratic Republic of Cameroon. I think his question has to do with consulting or something of that nature. Is it possible to have support for enterprise using permaculture design?
I believe so. I mean, there are, and I always refer people back to their continents and, if possible, their countries, to look at what permaculture is happening in your country, what kind of support networks already exist. I mean, we run something called the Permaculture Magazine Prize, which is £25,000 that we give away. We've given away last year, we're giving it away this year. And the idea of that is to support best practice projects and help build those networks. So I would be really keen to find out who's doing what near you and what kind of training and skills do they have that they can share to support the project, rather than bringing someone in from outside the region. And then if there's no one in the direct country or region, then looking at Africa, looking at Ghana Permaculture Institute, who were our prize winners for 2018, that run incredible and wonderful trainings and do a lot of economic regeneration in their area, and really have developed some good models, as indeed in Malawi and Kenya as well.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, yes. One more question. Pupak asks, where is the edge of permaculture practice and rewilding a landscape, allowing and assisting nature to take its own course? Yes.
It's a great question. So we always, even from the early days of Bill Mollison, there's always been the concept of zoning. So you have zone 0 is the house, and zone 1 is the immediate outside your back double garden where you grow your salads, and then zone 2 is your more extensive vegetable patch, and zone 3 you might be putting your pasture systems, and zone 4 you'd be having your woodlots and your timber and your so it's like the further away somewhere is, the less you're needing to visit it. So you're only going to visit for coppicing or collecting timber at certain times of the year. So that's furthest away from where you lay your head and sleep, but you want to pick your herbs and salads every day, so that needs to be on a doorstep. And zone 5 is the area of the property or the farm or the site that you're designing that you don't there is no intervention. This is just the wild zone, and we have a zone like that at the Sustainability Centre, which is on a boundary with our neighbours, and that is the part of the woodland where we don't take kids, we don't plant, we allow natural regeneration. It's the rewilding zone. But, you know, most people don't have big areas. So, say in my garden, it's not, you know, 28 hectares. It's much, much smaller. So I have wild zones in my garden where, you know, volunteer species will come in and I will not interfere with them. And I've tried to design the most naturalistic, biodiverse, species-rich ecosystem I can, so that the most cultivated areas are only the first zone of the vegetable garden, and the rest, the orchards, are absolutely teeming with wildlife and are you know, they are the wild, less touched zones. And where my bees are, pretty wild up there, I tell you.
I can imagine.
So that edge of wildness, how we design rewilding into our enterprises, I think that's very much connected with this principle of constantly adapting to change and accepting feedback and creating those sort of feedback loops, so that when the unexpected comes in, you're in a state of mind where you are responding with imagination, and you're not limiting yourselves. You're trying to step outside of your cultural conditioning so that you take away limits, and you're constantly seeking the edge in everything that you do. And sometimes, let's face it, it can be scary. It can be really scary, because we're putting ourselves really out there on the edge, on the front line, and we're standing up for stuff in societies that don't buy into those ethics. It's tough.
Well, here's a very business-oriented question. The question by, let me see, sorry, I lost it. Oh, here it is, by Ali, is how are decisions made in this complex enterprise and money coming in and out? Is there any flow?
Well, there has to be flow.
Decisions made?
There has to be flow. There has to be flow. So in my organisation, and it's best if I talk really about the publishing company. So each person is a node in the system. Each person has the maturity to have an element of self-responsibility. It's very important to have good clarity and definition of responsibility and, you know, job descriptions. What is my role? What functions must I perform, and not just delegate or leave to other people. So we need to have that sort of organizational clarity. Once you have an organizational clarity, you know, and also you have the systems backed up. You have to have the systems in an organization so that you can check in and see that stuff's being done. But fundamentally, although we do some of our operations from the Sustainability Centre, the main people working in the core business are actually working remotely on the cloud, very much like Gaia Education functions. So we use cloud technology for our accounting. We do all the things, you know, all the file sharing systems. We share our information like that. We talk to each other on internet, phone. We have Skypes, we have Zooms. You know, we use technology to network within our organisation as much as we do outside our organisation. And then we meet. So we are based, most of us are geographically within reasonable distance. We don't commute in every day, but, you know, we'll meet at least once or twice a month. And we make that a social event where we share food, and we have, we design in those edges of community and well-being, as well as you know, meetings and agendas and business support. And some of us are day-to-day responsible for the financial flow. So the marketing, and different people, as I said, have different roles. One person runs all our social media that we input into it. One person does all our accounting day to day, but we can see what he's done. Another person runs our sales and advertising. But three of us work within the marketing, because that's absolutely fundamental to our survival, that we produce books and sell them. It's no good being brilliantly good at editing and producing a magazine or book. If no one reads it, it's a pointless exercise. So we have very clear roles, and we have feedback systems, and we also have a culture where, you know, if someone's feeling rough or overworked, we have a culture where we can say, hey guys, I'm a bit overwhelmed this week. I've got this and this and this going on. Can you give me a little bit of support? And those communication channels are that people care aspect incredibly important. This is a self-maintaining, self-responsible system. It's not a hierarchy that I sit at the top of the pyramid with a stick and beat the person below me if they fail to perform. And ultimately, you see, if we fail to perform, none of us get paid. If we don't hit, you know, we have budgets, we have targets. If we're unable to hit them, then we can't produce new media. You know, the whole system has to have flow, and we have to have those feedback loops called account systems, and we have to do the business analysis. You know, I know I repeat this a lot, but it's incredibly important in our movement full of wonderful vision and inspiration that we ground it. It's like there's no point in planting a tree unless you plant it properly and you stake it and you protect it and you water it if it's in an arid place. There's no point, because it will die. And it's the same with the business. There's no point in starting an enterprise, whether it's charity or you know, not-for-profit or commercial, unless you're really going to nurture it and put all of those practical elements in place and get the right people. So, you know, I don't have all the skills that I need to run permanent publications. I work with colleagues who have different skills to me. We have a diversity of skills and we have a common vision, and we pull those skills for the good of that vision and for the good of the enterprise.
Oh, well, I think that applies to everything in life. Yeah. And that's great advice. We could go on for quite a long time, but we had actually only budgeted about an hour. We went a little bit over that.
I slightly ran over. I'm sorry about that.
That's fine. I'm enjoying it a lot, but we don't have infinite amounts of time. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to thank you one more time, Maddy, and thank you for all the participants who joined us in this webinar. I hope that you got a lot of good information. There's a whole list of webinars that Gaia Education offers, and you can find those on our website. Maddy, this is really a great experience for me. I want to remind people that Gaia Education offers this learning journey to become a certified trainer, whereby you take a training of trainers program, a face-to-face program, and a specialized online program, and then you can go out and teach the curriculum that Gaia Education has prepared for you. If you're interested, please visit, and you can find more about that. Also, our next course precisely is on economic design, and it starts on March 18 in English and on March 25th in Spanish. We also offer our courses online in Portuguese as well. We have many publications, and we are offering a 10% discount to any of our books for those of you who use this code on top of the the slide. Are you able to see the slide? I hope so, but anyway, somebody said that they were not able to see the slides. I hope you can see them. Live Web 2019 is the code for a 10% discount in case you don't see the slide. We have SDG cards and a SDG handbook for multipliers to initiate conversations about activating SDGs in your community or region. Subscribe to our newsletter for more and visit us on social media. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Maddy, once more.
Thank you. Bye.
And now I can stop sharing the screen and the recording. Hold on. There we go. Stop recording.